Do you remember being the odd kid out in the lunchroom on the first day of school? You know, trying to find a seat somewhere between the girl that's definitely out of your league and the girl that's definitely gonna stab you. Everyone looks like they're ready to either make out with and/or murder you? That is exactly how it feels when first introduced to any cast in the Danganronpa franchise. First impressions aside, we eventually grow to understand these peculiar classmates throughout the coming days. We understand what built them, broke them, and even if we don't befriend them, we understand them. That too is the same with the classes of Hope's Peak. Or so one would hope. Despite their standing in a class of ultimate talent, certain characters ultimately fail to sway the audience to their side. Like many a lone wolf in a mid-90s rom-com, we need to give these teenage nightmares a much-needed makeover. Amongst those despair-destined students is today's glow-up in progress, Yasuhiro Hagakure, the ultimate clairvoyant. Need a refresher on our unfortunate fortune teller? Not only is Yasuhiro one of the 16 participants of the original Killing Game, he's also somehow one of the survivors. After being blamed for not one, but 2 murders and getting offed immediately in the demo, this doofus crawled out of Hope's Peak by the skin of his teeth. His continued existence has done little to solicit any love in the fandom, however, as the 10th anniversary art book revealed him to be people's second least favorite character in the entire game, overshadowed only by What's Ya Matter with You? How could someone with such a widespread capacity to make a splash still leave people high and dry? Yasuhiro might have his head stuck in the future, but let's sneak a peek back at his past to see where he went wrong. I bet we have more than a 30% chance of getting it right. Hiro has 3 primary issues inhibiting his impact. Number 1, an imbalanced personality. Number 2, inexistent development. And number 3, impractical contributions. As we strive to better steer this seer, there is but one rule to follow. We can only change Yasuhiro's role in the narrative without changing the narrative itself. That means, unfortunately, that Yasuhiro will still survive through to the end of the game. It also means preserving his role in the Danganronpa 3 anime, because I would otherwise be restructuring an entire television series, and I'm not that much of a masochist. Instead, we're transforming Yasuhiro into a worthwhile member of the Killing Game investigation team. With that foundation established, let's start by renovating that uneven nature of his, shall we? If you were to stick a singular trope to Yasuhiro's character, which would you select? That's right, the comic relief. Once the intensity of the storyline starts escalating at unprecedented speeds, Yasuhiro helps to divert the player's attention and ease their anxiety with an unrelated topic or an idiotic comment. The problem? We don't need a comic relief when all the other characters provide their own brand of humor. Yakiya's deadpan, Toko's aggressiveness, Aoi's gluttony, all act to diffuse tension naturally, while still positively contributing to both plot topics and casual conversation. Hiro needs a signature style to compete with his class of natural comedians. I have 3 ideas in mind for this. Option A, as someone who openly admits his non-intellectual flaws, Hiro could easily lean into self-deprecating humor often utilized by professional comedians. Given the litany of negative qualities the developers baked directly into his personality, this seems like the simplest choice. Option 2, throw in some hyperbolic humor. It would make sense that the man translating cryptic messages from the cosmos can't exactly discern exaggeration from reality. And our last choice? Black comedy. For those unaware, this isn't about the race of people, but rather about dealing with dark topics in lighthearted ways. This admittedly suits the genre more than Yasuhiro himself, but he's surely seen some ish in his visions. He could hone that hardened understanding to soothe the others instead. Even with his wit refined, Yasuhiro cannot rely on charm alone to make it through every instance unscathed. If he hopes to compare with his fellow survivors, he had best flesh out the rest of his personality too. Let's look at Yasuhiro's outright flaws. Gullible and lazy, anxious and insulting, unhygienic and unhelpful, and as bad with his schooling as he is with his women. Then surely he's got a plethora of positives to counteract his weaknesses, right?
No, that's wrong!
Yasuhiro has 2 obvious strengths, his happy-go-lucky nature and his friendliness. However, the narrative undoes both aspects. The nature of the killing game sends him spiraling into a panic-stricken craze and accusing even sweethearts like Ogre of outright hostility. Why not allow him to maintain his composure whilst everyone else loses their cool? That doesn't mean we need to erase his initial refusal to believe in the truth of their circumstances. That's an archetype that helps players as much as it provides levity. But the more that he outlasts his companions, we can allow him to shift. This isn't his first rodeo outrunning death, remember. He's been hunted by the Yakuza. For him to come to grips publicly with his potential demise so as to keep all these youngsters in line, whilst privately freaking out and even using his powers to predict a happy ending for them? Why, that sounds like a much more effective countenance.
But Homestead,
You say.
keeping calm is what Kyoko is for.
Consider this. Yasuhiro expresses and uses his composure separately from Kyoko. Why does Kyoko keep calm? To throw off the mastermind and further her own goals. Her consistent mistrust of others makes her composure solely self-serving. But consider Yasuhiro cracking jokes to keep everyone grounded. His easygoing influence could deflate the fears and fury of the others, just as you could argue that he attempts, but fails, to do in the original narrative. Consider Hiro sharing a story about a crazy situation he's been in when on the run from the Mafia, or when a prediction to their, Prime Minister went awry. For anyone familiar with Schitt's Creek, think of Alexis, casually mentioning how she survived a kidnapping by a terrorist organization, or, being illegally shipped off to the black market during a foreign trade broker's yacht party or something. Not only does this shed light on the background of the storyteller, but it makes the player chuckle, distracts the other characters, and lifts the atmosphere of the scene while still making sense within the context of the world. But truly, anything would be better than the alien cheeseburger scene. With his personality revolutionized, perhaps it's time to tackle his second shortcoming, in Inexistent development. Nothing proves Yasuhiro's stagnancy as much as his role in Danganronpa 3, an entire anime where he just sits directly outside of the action and contributes less than people that are not even present at the scene of the killing game. Some could argue that Yasuhiro's arc is one of regression, going from disbelief to panic to reluctant resolve. As someone who loves regressive character arcs, let me ask ya, what was the point of it? If it was to portray how trauma forces good people to make bad decisions, he would have killed someone. There's nothing his regression proves that other characters present don't exemplify all the more. If even Aoi has her time in the hot seat, so too should Yasuhiro. My concept for his progression comes not from his canonical incarnation, but from our current reworking. Even with that newly minted outlook on life, I still want to see Yasuhiro unravel over time. Only now, we'll see it solely in private. What could cause such an unexpected breakdown? Why, if his powers failed him, of course. In the world of Danganronpa, talent is everything. He wouldn't even be in Hope's Peak to begin with should he not have used his abilities up until now. To have a character whose talent should prove the most useful become completely incompetent when it counts? Now that's grounds for upheaval. Let's start out by having Yasuhiro make small predictions, ones that don't matter all that much when they don't come true. Over time, however, this both discredits him in the eyes of the others and seeds doubt inside of himself. If we have witnessed how undone confidence reshapes Byakuya's nature, we can see how dismantled talent can affect Yasuhiro's. And when he finds how useless he is without his talent to rely on, he determines to become a useful member of their team. So, what are those predictions Yasuhiro is so keen on making? In the original narrative, a majority of Hiro's predictions and prophecies related to the occult. This misled me to believe that extraterrestrial activity was somehow involved in the student's abduction. Instead of altering the entire narrative to accommodate his misdirection, let's shift the focus of his visions. What if Yasuhiro wasn't seeing the future, but remembering the past? Consider this. In Chapter 1, Makoto fears for Sayaka's safety when she fails to show up in the auditorium. But Hiro reassures him that everything will be fine. He foresaw them munching on some grub together outside of school. That means they have to survive this together. And then she's found in the shower. Okay, he can write that off. His predictions aren't perfect after all. Maybe he misinterpreted. He's positive that at least Chihiro and Mondo will make it. They're gonna go see that new horror movie together once this is over. But then Chihiro is strung up and Mondo's executed. Not only does this present Hiro with obstacles to overcome personally, but it validates the photos that Makoto is discovering independently. That said, don't go cutting out the conspiracy theories. Yasuhiro having these terrors of what lies in wait for them outside of the school is hysterical and appropriate. But instead of leaving them as nonsensical gibberish, what if we use them to allude to something more? Instead of suspecting aliens, skew his foresight towards the apocalypse. After all, how many oracles have envisioned the end of time? Let him babble on about a mask-wearing cult, about animals walking around like people, robots wreaking havoc on cities worldwide. No one would take that seriously at first glance. But in hindsight, you can see how Hiro simply misinterpreted his prescience. If we've carved out his development, Hiro has but one obstacle left before newfound fulfillment: his impractical contributions. Yasuhiro has a complicated history with class trials. While harmless throughout the first two, he's helplessly clueless in the third, unwittingly deceptive in the fourth, and outright insufferable in the fifth. Does he contribute to the proceedings? Reactively, but undoubtedly. Does he assist in untangling the mystery? Absolutely not. Considering that the class trials act as, the core mechanic of Danganronpa, I'm gonna take a shot in the dark and say Yasuhiro ought to receive an upgrade in this department. We need to take him from blabbering, blubbering buffoonery to, maintaining a modicum of competence at least. Let's start with his first significant court case, Class Trial 3. I say we stick with his initial breakdown, as we need to see the building apprehension overwhelm him at some point. What better time than when everyone is convinced he's a convict in the making? However, there are two adjustments that will help this pack a harder punch. Given the lead up to the trial itself, having Yasuhiro start off frantic and defensive is justified for sure. But sobbing from the get-go? You're reaching the apex of emotion way too soon! Save that for when Celeste reveals one key element conspicuously missing from this trial: the motive. At the beginning of this chapter, Monokuma offers 10 million yen to the next Blackened. While this ultimately propels Celeste into action, which always struck me as odd considering she's proven to make considerable profits in no time flat and would have no issue doing so after escaping under ordinary circumstances, it would draw suspicion towards Yasuhiro too. Suspicion that Celeste could instigate. Why? Because, as we learn through his free time events, Yasuhiro owes the mob an unfathomable amount of money. An amount they're looking to collect on as soon as Yasuhiro escapes. Should Celeste reveal this factoid during the trial, it would undoubtedly destroy Yasuhiro. That is, until the tables turn on Celeste. When Yasuhiro realizes he's been framed, have him clean up his act in time to support the investigation. After all, he's kept it together thus far for the sake of the others, and they desperately need everyone in fighting form right now, Hiro included. But how would Celeste even know about this little predicament Yasuhiro finds himself in? That's actually potentially the easiest part of this problem to solve. Celeste plays cards with the mob. The mob informs her of a debt they're looking to collect on someone in the school she's about to attend. Since Celeste would retain her memory of anything occurring before Hope's Peak initiation ceremony, she would still remember that Yasuhiro owes the mob a whole lot of moolah. So we've ironed out Robo Justice's trial, but there's another beefy behemoth whose proceedings need polishing: the suicide of Sakura Ogami. While I personally found Hiro's violence uncharacteristic and his cover-up eye-roll worthy, I found myself outnumbered in that regard, so I will allow his actions to continue, so long as I amplify his motive to perform them. Remember how Hiro is slowly losing confidence in his fortunes? Well, let's say he made one just before visiting Sakura in the rec room, and he found that he'd be safe in the end. Until he hears her utter that she's ending it, and, not solely out of survival instinct, but now because of his growing internal paranoia, Hiro decides to make his prediction come true, with one glass bottle. Last but not least, the most infamous issue of all, the Kyoko ghost incident. Even the characters in-game agreed that they should not have had to endure Yasuhiro's stupidity at the outset of Class Trial 5. So do we nix it entirely? Not exactly. We have to stop and consider why this moment was included. The writers knew they needed to draw attention to the oddities of Mukuro's hands while elaborating on the mystery surrounding Kyoko's gloves. You, as a player, should wonder why the ultimate soldier of all things is walking around with a bunch of fake nails. So how do we present this topic without spoon-feeding obvious information to players and infantilizing the intellect of one of our characters? Option A. Kyoko arrives late to the class trial. Having Yasuhiro question whether the corpse is Kyoko makes sense when she's not present. Should Monokuma attempt to punish Kyoko for her tardiness, she can offer to explain where she's been, somewhere without monitors, without speakers, somewhere she'd be happy to show the rest of the class. That would shut him up and provide an adequate means for the trial to proceed without turning Hiro into a zero. Or, option B. Have Kyoko arrive on time, as her conversation with Makoto is technically integral for avoiding the bad ending, but have Hiro redirect his efforts to identify the body in general. Should he mention that they assumed it to be Kyoko, she can question his reasoning and allow the others to elaborate on her gloved hands and the fake nails. With the 5th trial laid to rest, so too must we bid adieu to this video. We've taken Yasuhiro from a buffoon fumbling over a crystal ball to an eccentric but easygoing goofball who depends on more than divination. What do you think about our reconstructed concept for the ultimate clairvoyant? If you have any ideas of your own, feel free to share them. Unlike Yasuhiro, this hero can't foresee every possible option. Be sure to stick around the homestead as I continue the Heroes Rewritten series for other characters from throughout the Danganronpa games, along with many more. But until we get to adventure together again, go find a way to be heroic in your own communities, and never give in to despair.